Welcome to Rock the Crown. Introducing our host, Nafisah, queen about her business 360. Host Naimah, queen get it done and fitness guru. Host Nefertari, queen residential redeveloper and creative director. Host Daaiyah, boss queen biz and youth motivator. All right, Crown Nation, let's get it. Season 2, Rock the Crown.
Welcome, Crown Nation, to another episode of Rock the Crown. I'm Nafisah, your host for today's show, but I'm not doing it by myself. I also have my co-host.
Hey, Nefertari here as one of your hosts today as well. And then our co-hosts are...
I'm Naimah.
And I'm Daaiyah.
And today's episode, we are focusing on buying the land. Yes, getting our piece of what they call this American dream. Not just a house anymore, because most of us have homes that we own. But in terms of trying to establish real wealth in our communities, real longevity in our communities, build sustainability in our communities, build self-sufficiency in our communities, we need some land. So today we're going to talk about different aspects of getting that land, and we want you all to pay attention. We hope we give you a little nuggets, and we hope we inspire you to put on your list to get some acres. So to get started, my co-host is going to tell us about different things we might talk about today.
So today we're going to give a basic overview on 4 different areas. We're going to be beginning with the landowner, our land ownership. You know, giving a little bit of history of where this actually started. Just from around the 1800s, so I really can't say started because we had a little history even before that, but we're going to be beginning in that area. And then we're going to get into the later history, just a little snippet, kind of talking about the 1900s, and then we're going to move forward to our current situation and land ownership and giving some good nuggets on that. And then we're going to go into ownership abroad. You know, we often look at property ownership here in the United States, but there are a lot of people doing some things overseas as well. So we're going to talk just a little bit about that today as well. So Naimah, why don't you give us a little information about the beginning, a little bit more on the beginning history.
Okay, so this is such an exciting topic because we know that here in America, land means money. And so starting off all the way back in the 1800s, in 1861 and 1862, the United States passed, of course, the Homestead Act. But the bigger part of passing this was, as the slavery had been abolished, and they're always acting as if they've given us all of these great tools and, oh, now you can own land and you have all these benefits and things like that. Well, although slavery was abolished, Black people began to seek land of their own. And in seeking land of their own, the Special Field Orders number 15 was issued through the Savannah Colloquy. Anyway, this order issued only freed Black people 40 acres. Now, this is important to note because this was all of the freed Black people, not just one person is freed and they get necessarily 40 acres. This was 40 acres of land. And this was along the coastline of Georgia and South Carolina. And so something else, we always hear this term 40 acres and a mule. After the war, there were mules everywhere. So they were like, okay, what can we do with these mules? And of course, unfortunately, they always like to give the African Americans the leftovers, right? So, we're giving them some land. Let's just go ahead and give them some mules too. So if they ran out of mules, everyone wasn't going to get a mule, but everyone wasn't necessarily going to also get 40 acres. But we had this whole premise of 40 acres and a mule. So the Freedmen's Bureau was created by the government and the president, Abraham Lincoln, in 1865 to deal with the issue of freed Black people and their settlement in the abandoned land. So this was like all of this land that was abandoned. It was beginning to kind of come together so that these freed Blacks could have this specific land for themselves. And it's important to note that when we're thinking about land here in the United States, it is in the southern states of, again, Georgia and South Carolina, where most of this land was given. You don't hear about, oh, we got 40 acres in California. We have a whole bunch of 40 acres in Connecticut. We have a whole bunch of 40 acres in Florida, So thinking about how this land was kind of given to us, so that we could use it for farming. I'll put it that way. Given to us so that we could use it for farming. Not necessarily given to us so that we can be powerful here in America, but given to us so that we can use it for farming. And then as we use that land, they love to give stuff and then take it back. And then, of course, President Johnson, later on in the years, he overturned the field order where, guess what? Now we can't have any land. And then we always want to know, why are our people always in an uproar? It's like you continue to want to give us something, but then you always want to continue to also take it back. And then as we're progressing through the 1800s, you have the 13th Amendment, where people were, it marked the abolition of slavery again, but we still had so many restrictions. And after the restrictions, then we go into the Civil War. And so now Nefertari will actually go into the aspect of what happened after the Civil War, going into the next century of the 1900s.
Right. So in 1862, this was also the time where the Department of Agriculture was created. So at this time, the legal administration was still very heavily favored by white Americans. And so despite the ongoing Civil War Act and the slavery of Black people, this movement kept going. Now, during the same year, U.S. Congress passed a Morrill Act, and that was also referred to as the Land Grant Act. And so this was meant for an offer of land to whites only, and their colleagues, and they taught the agriculture and the mechanical courses and stuff like that. And so even though it was meant for that, still for white America, they were like benefiting more greatly in that area. So also in addition to Congress, they also passed the Homestead Act in 1862. So this was where things were legalized, the acquisition of land in the West. And so with this, it came offers of subsidies to facilitate the acquisitions, which the land, for the use of the land. Now, however, these benefits were reserved for whites only. So Black Americans were not able to enjoy this. Their rights as landowners did not come at this time. However, in 1910, the records show that more Black Americans, they owned land during that time than ever before in the history of the United States. And so 14 million acres of land, they were owned by approximately 210,000 Black people. And so this led this time period as the heightening area for Black land ownership. And so since then, Black ownership has been on a steady decline, when we kind of look at things today. And so we have some land and we hear a lot of stories on different areas. And so we're going to kind of touch into that. And Nafisah, you probably can go into talking about, despite the efforts of Black ownership of the land, we still are kind of like going in a spiral decline even today.
Right. Yes, and thank you so much for that basic and general overview because we need to make sure that we understand the history. And even though that was just a brief little taste, you can take different bits of this Crown Nation and go and further research into the more, details of the historical land ownership, particularly of African Americans. Of course, we own land as Naima talked about. We did land and were here, and night Nefertari talked about too, even before that. So we're not even talking about when we really first came over here, right before even Christopher Columbus. We're not even talking about that. But but keep in mind that's a part of the history too, and y'all can look that up. But and keeping in line with what we were saying about land ownership and land being very important, and that there's been a concerted effort for us not to acquire land, right? So you heard a lot about red line, and a lot of this developed, with the FHA and trying to keep blacks from owning land in particular areas or buying houses in particular areas. And there's a whole PBS special on just that particular aspect on how the government, state and federal governments, have used redlining to deny us particular land ownership, right? So that's a whole nother area too that you can touch on. What we really wanted to do with this particular show was inspire people to really put buying land on their radar. Before it used to be like, oh, I just want to get a house. I want to get a nice house with a nice yard and a nice picket fence. Well, now we need to think about land ownership and acquiring land and acres and working that land, and not just for agricultural purposes, although that would be something that we would want to do, but also just in terms of being self sufficient. Here in Atlanta, we just experienced over the last couple of days where our power went out, right? Because we get our power from Georgia Power and snapping shows. So we're sitting around, everybody's sitting around in their house in the dark, right? In their house, waiting for Georgia Power to come and fix it. But if you had your own land, right? And you had your generators and you held your solar panels, you wouldn't have to do that, right? So we'd be more self-sufficient. So this is what we want to talk about. We wanted to touch bases on. And there's been a lot of families and groups of African Americans that have moved towards acquiring land. You have some that are doing a lot of, we're getting a lot of homesteading. If you go do a search on YouTube for Black homesteading families, there's families that's starting to purchase 10 acres, 20 acres, because they want to set up their whole homestead where they totally self-sufficient, got their wells, got a pond on there, they're installing solar power, to be able to have a power system. And also in addition to having farms. So there's families that's doing that. Just recently, this summer during the whole COVID thing, you had a whole 19 families come together in Georgia and purchase almost 97 acres in southern Georgia because they want to build that particular town up. And it wasn't just land that they purchased, but some of this land also had all structures already in this small little town, already had structures in this small little town. So these are some of the ideas that we can think about in terms of making sure that we buy land and put that on our radar of getting our own 40 acres and a mule, right? And getting our own 10 acres. We might start with 10, we might start with, 20 acres and moving that on. So that's something that we really want to encourage people to do when you're searching for your next home. Search for it with some acreage attached to it. And we want to move on to Daaiyah telling us about how Blacks are investing in buying land abroad. Daaiyah, do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, sure. Well, as most of you know, hopefully most of our viewers, we've talked a lot about traveling abroad, and this is something that I'm very passionate about. On my next trip, hopefully abroad, I am hoping to sit down with some realtors and sit down with some developers and be able to see what opportunities there are in these other countries, to build homes or to build stores or just to have some land. To be able to gift and to deed to my children. So that's another thing that I wanted to mention is, being able to pass down this land, because that's how a lot of our Caucasian brothers and sisters have their land and their property is that it's been owned in their family for years. And speaking of land, I can't help but to mention, the land that we purchased from an African American family. This was, I think, back in 2016. We purchased 120 acres in Fort Valley. And we purchased this land from an African American family. They actually were, I think they were in the process of losing the land. They were actually going to have to sell it for taxes or something. But this was a situation where the land was passed down in their family. And by the time it got to this generation just could not maintain it. They could not sustain it because it had just been a deed, it just been land. So we purchased that in hopes of building community, building agriculture, building homes. We did eventually have to sell that land. The good thing about it is that everyone was able to get their investment back. We sold the land, everyone received, what they invested back, and we're hoping to be able to do that again. It just was not the right time, or, it just was not. We also had the opposition from Peach County, which I am going to call you out, Peach County, because you did deny our permits. I don't know if you all know, there was actually a Facebook page that was created by Peach County residents, and the page was called Peach County Residents Against New Africa Halal Farms. They don't know what halal is. They
Right.
don't know what's going on there at the farm. All they know is it's Muslims and it's Black Muslims, and we're against it. And so this really caused a lot of issues for us. And so this just tells us how important it is that we place our stake in these countries. I mean, in these countries, buy this land. And in addition to buying land, I want to encourage us to also become more active in the municipalities where you are located. Because what can happen is you can own a property, you can own land, but there can be a city council meeting that votes to completely redistrict your area. I mean, anything can happen. They have a lot of tricky ways that they swoop, your property from under you. So in addition to buying our land, buying our homes, we also need to always keep a listening ear and be very active in our government to find out what's going on in my city, what's going on in my county, and how is this going to affect me. Um, in mentioning, purchasing abroad, I think that's also something that we should consider. Allah made this earth spacious for us, right? And we were blessed to be able to be born here. America is a great country. We have been able to really, have great opportunities here in this land. But I think we should not feel restricted to being in this land. We should not feel like this is the only tell all. There is so much out there to explore.
Right.
And even though America is our home, we should have a home here. We should have land here. And we should also go out and discover and figure out where is our soul, where is our soul at peace elsewhere? Because so many of us are not at peace here. America is really getting very, very tense. Hopefully we can all work together, Black and white, all, nationalities, and try to make it better, make it what it really can be. But in the meantime, let's try to build wherever we can, so that we can have those opportunities. We don't want to be restricted. Don't restrict ourselves. And owning your own land gives you the opportunity to have, you have options. If we had a piece of land, let's say I get put out. If I got a piece of land and it's warm outside, I'm gonna set up my tent. We're gonna have to rough it out. Sometimes it may come to that. Who knows? You watch the movies.
Right.
Quarantine. So we've been stuck watching a lot of the movies that, show these kind of things. So
Right.
you never know what's going to happen, but just have that backup. That's what I think that, this segment, is hopefully encouraging people to do, is to, be prepared, prepare yourself, land up, I guess we'll say, get yourself some.
I like that. Land up. Land up.
Yeah. So that's my piece. Nafisah, I guess I'll turn it back over to you and Nefertari to close out the segment.
Yeah, that was fantastic. I really and I really like that land up, and that in Islam it says the whole world is a masjid. And this particular thing always stuck with me because it lets us know that wherever you are, you have the whole creation. You don't have to be stuck there. If you're feeling oppressed in a particular place, you could try to make moves to another place. And sometimes that place is another city. Sometimes it's another state. Sometimes it's another country. Sometimes we might have to go to another continent, or we can go to several of them. The beautiful thing about being able to fly is that you can go all over, So I just really enjoyed this episode. And Crown Nation, I really want to encourage you to pursue land ownership, and not just for the sake of pursuing land ownership, but for the sake of having it as a foundation of building generational wealth, and take into consideration particularly the historical aspects that Naimah and Nefertari touched on, as well as the regulatory, which is very, very important, right, that Daaiyah talked about, right? Because you can own some land and then people be trying to tell you what you can and cannot do with your land. And so that's very important that you look into the particular zoning and regulations in that particular area. So, and to wrap up, we want, oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, real quick, before, I really just want to encourage people. I know that we don't all the times do this, but I really want to encourage people as we're buying land to really look into the history of how we have owned land and how the land has been developed through African-American communities here in America. So I'm encouraging everybody to go out and watch The Black Miami. It is on Amazon Prime. It's on Amazon Prime. And I believe you can also go to YouTube to view it. It was very, very, very eye-opening for me. And it really talks about how Miami Beach was developed. And so I'm encouraging everybody to make sure that they go out and see that. In the next couple of weeks, especially we're about to hunker down over the winter break, the Black Miami is something you should look into.
Right. And there's a PBS special on land ownership in Minneapolis area in Minnesota, and they go through the whole history. And even though it only took, that particular documentary focuses on Minneapolis, the stuff that they talked about and how they detailed and traced it is applicable to a lot of other cities and states in terms of that. It gives you a very good history, and it goes up to the federal level too, in the establishment of the FHA and how they establish redlining. So all that is important for you to keep in mind as you pursue land ownership, Crown Nation. So we want to make sure that you like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and make sure you send us your comments, because we want to make sure that we are telling our episodes and our content to meet your needs and to help you grow. So thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Rock the Crown.
See you next time.
Next time.
Bye.
Peace out. Land up.
Land up. Yes.